The snow was falling in that quiet way it sometimes does in December, as if the sky is trying not to disturb anyone. It sifted down over the old brick buildings on Maple Avenue, softened the edges of parked cars, and settled in a thin white layer on the wide stone steps of Grace Street Community Church. Through the tall stained glass windows, a warm, golden light spilled out onto the sidewalk, stretching toward the street like an invitation. Somewhere inside, the choir was warming up, their voices faint, just a distant rise and fall of harmony. Christmas Eve service would begin any minute. But outside, on the top step closest to the heavy wooden doors, Elise Harper pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders and tried not to shiver. The coat had once been a deep navy, but winters and bus rides had faded it to something dull and tired. Her scarf was unraveling at one end, threads hanging loose, damp from melted snow. Beside her sat a scuffed suitcase with one broken wheel, the handle patched with duct tape. All that she owned, really, could rattle inside it. In one raw, reddened hand, Elise held a cheap ballpoint pen. In the other, a folded sheet of paper borrowed from the church's free pamphlet table earlier that afternoon. She had been writing by the light that seeped through the stained glass, the ink already smudged in places where snowflakes had landed before she could brush them away. "Dear Mom," she whispered as she tried to finish the sentence. "I'm trying, but I'm tired, so tired." The words blurred as a tear dropped onto the page, soaking a corner. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, more out of habit than hope. If you're listening to this story in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling while the world feels so far away, you might recognize that kind of tired. Not just in the bones, but in the spirit. The kind of tired where even lifting your head feels like a decision. Elise glanced at the tiny photograph resting in her lap. Two women stood beside an upright piano in a sunlit room. The younger one laughed, head tilted back, hair shining, fingers hovering over the keys as if a song had just been played. The older woman, her mother, watched her with that soft, proud smile only a parent can manage. Elise barely recognized the joyful girl at the piano anymore. Her reflection in shop windows lately showed someone else. Cheeks hollowed by worry, eyes shadowed by too many restless nights on hard surfaces. Footsteps crunched through the fresh snow at the bottom of the steps. A man was walking up the sidewalk with a little girl at his side. He wore a dark wool coat, well cut but not flashy, his gloved hands tucked in his pockets. His name was Daniel Brooks, though Elise didn't know that yet. He looked like the kind of man who spent his days in conference rooms and on phone calls, shoulders squared by responsibility. There was a crease between his brows that didn't come from age so much as from carrying too much for too long. The little girl beside him skipped more than walked, her pink coat bright against the white and gray of the evening. Her knitted hat had a pom-pom that bounced with every step. That was Emma, 7 years old, full of questions, and old enough to have seen more grief than a child should. As they reached the base of the church steps, Daniel's eyes landed on the figure curled near the door. Instinctively, he tightened his hold on Emma's hand. "Stay close, sweetheart," he murmured. "It's cold. We don't want to be late." But Emma had already slowed down. Children see things adults have trained themselves to glance past. She studied Elise, really looked at her. The too thin coat, the suitcase, the way her shoulders curled inward like someone trying to disappear into themselves. "Daddy," Emma said quietly, her breath a small cloud in the air. "That lady looks really, really sad." Daniel hesitated. There was the warm light behind the church doors, people filing in with polished shoes and wool scarves, the comfortable script of the evening already written in his mind. Service, cocoa, drive home. This young woman on the steps was not in the script. "Come on, Em," he said gently. "We can't help everyone. Maybe you've told yourself the same thing at some point just to get through the day." But Emma didn't move. Her mitten slipped from his hand. While Daniel stood there, caught between caution and compassion, his daughter walked up the steps, the snow creaking under her boots. Elise didn't notice at first. She was staring down at her letter, blinking hard to keep the tears from spilling over. Then a small shadow fell across the page. She looked up, startled. A little girl in a rosy pink coat stood before her, cheeks flushed, eyes wide and steady. Snowflakes clung to Emma's eyelashes, making her look like she'd stepped out of some old Christmas card. But her gaze wasn't dreamy or distant. It was focused, clear, as if she were looking straight through the layers of fatigue wrapped around Elise's heart. For a long second, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by the hush of falling snow and muffled carols from inside. Elise felt exposed, like someone had torn the curtain away from the life she'd been trying to hide. Then Emma did something simple and impossibly brave. She took one step closer, opened her small arms as wide as they would go, and said softly, "I think you need a hug. Can I hug you?" Elise's breath caught. The pen slipped from her fingers and rolled down a step, forgotten. No one had asked to hug her in months. No one had looked at her like she was anything more than a problem, a statistic on a cold sidewalk. Yet here was this little girl, waiting, arms open, as if what Elise needed most in the world wasn't money or advice or judgment, but warmth. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say no, to warn the girl away from the frayed edges of a life that hadn't gone right. Instead, all she managed was a tiny, trembling nod. Emma stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Elise's shoulders as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And on that cold stone step, between the glow of stained glass and the drifting snow, two lives quietly began to change. At first, Elise stayed stiff in the little girl's arms, like someone who isn't sure whether the ground beneath them is solid. Her hands hovered uncertainly in the air, fingers shaking not just from the cold, but from the shock of being held. No one had embraced her since the hospital, since the last days with her mother. Since then, every touch had been accidental, a jostle on a bus, a shoulder bump on a crowded sidewalk. Nothing gentle, nothing chosen. Slowly, as if something inside her began to thaw, Elise's shoulders dropped. Her chin came to rest on Emma's small shoulder. Her fingers closed around the back of the child's coat with a kind of fragile desperation. The world shrank to the warmth of that tiny body and the steady rhythm of a little heart beating against her. She didn't sob out loud. The tears came silently, the way they often do when you're too tired to make a sound. Her chest shuddered as months of swallowed grief found a crack to seep through. The snow kept falling around them, soft and quiet, as if even the sky understood that something sacred was happening. Down on the lower step, Daniel watched, stunned into stillness. The protective instincts that made him want to pull his daughter away met something else in him. A memory of nights sitting on the bathroom floor after his wife died. Trying not to let Emma see his shoulders shake, he recognized that silent kind of crying. He'd carried it too. After a moment, he stepped closer. He didn't interrupt, didn't clear his throat or say reassuring words that would only bounce off the rawness in front of him. Instead, he unwound his charcoal scarf from his neck, thick and still warm, and gently draped it over Elise's shoulders from behind. The wool settled around her like a small, wordless promise. You are not invisible. Elise flinched at the unexpected weight, then drew in a shaky breath. She looked up at him, eyes red-rimmed, lashes jeweled with melted snow. I haven't been hugged in months," she whispered, as if confessing something shameful. Emma squeezed her tighter. "Daddy says crying lets the sad come out so happy can come back in," she said with the simple wisdom children carry without trying. A broken laugh slipped out of Elise, soft and surprised, half sob, half breath. It startled her to hear it, like discovering a forgotten song still hiding in her chest. Daniel knelt so he was closer to her eye level, his voice low and unhurried. "There's hot cocoa inside," he said, nodding toward the open church doors, where warmth and light spilled out into the winter air. "You don't have to stay for the service. Just come in and get warm, that's all." Elise glanced past him at the doorway, where the faint sound of carols floated from somewhere deep inside the building. She shook her head slightly. "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured, the words worn smooth from how often she'd used them. "You're not a burden," Daniel replied. "You're just cold, and we have cocoa. Sometimes that's enough reason." Beside her, Emma slid her small hand into Elise's, fingers curling with complete trust. That simple touch did what words couldn't. Elise nodded once, barely, like someone stepping onto uncertain ice and deciding to take the first step anyway. Together, they rose from the stone step. Daniel moved ahead and pulled the heavy wooden door open. Warmth spilled out, carrying the scent of cinnamon and something like hope. As they stepped through, a stray gust of wind caught the folded letter that had been resting beside Elise. It slipped from the step, fluttered once, and landed on the cold stone. Snow began to fall over it, slow and patient, tucking it gently out of sight. Inside the church hall, the air was softer, almost tender. Heat from a small stone fireplace seeped slowly into the room, chasing the winter from corners and fingers. Stained glass along the far wall painted gentle strokes of amber, blue, and rose across the wooden floor, like quiet pieces of sunset that had decided to stay a little longer. Someone had set out folding chairs and small round tables. On one of them, a silver urn of cocoa steamed beside a tray of cinnamon bread. Elise sat at a table close to the fire, hands wrapped around a paper cup that felt almost too warm to touch. The cocoa's surface wobbled with each small tremor in her fingers. Emma slid into the chair beside her, close enough that their sleeves brushed. Without a word, the little girl placed her mittened hand over Elise's, as if anchoring her in this unfamiliar harbor. Across the room, Daniel stood near one of the high windows, his own cup untouched. He watched them quietly, not with the impatience of someone who'd done a good deed and was ready to move on, but with the careful attention of someone who understood that some moments should not be rushed. Elise let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. A faint smile flickered at the edge of her lips, not quite reaching her eyes. "Your little girl," she said finally, her voice rough from cold and crying. "She touched something in me I thought was gone." Daniel didn't answer. He just nodded, as if to say, "I know the feeling." Emma turned her face up toward Elise, eyes open and waiting. She didn't ask questions out loud, but her expression said clearly, "I'm listening if you want to talk." Sometimes that's all it takes for words to begin. "It was just my mom and me," Elise said slowly, as if choosing each memory with care. "She raised me on music and kindness. We never had much, but somehow it always felt like enough." Her gaze drifted toward the fire. "She got sick last year, pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much time to argue with it." She paused, swallowing hard. "I was teaching music at an elementary school. Nothing fancy, but I loved it. I took a leave when she got sick. Thought I'd be back in a few weeks." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "It got bad fast. I used up all my leave and then I quit. I couldn't leave her alone." From the pocket of her coat, Elise pulled out a thin silver chain. A small treble-clef pendant hung from it, dull with age but intact. She held it up so the firelight caught its tired shine. "She gave me this when I was 12, Elise whispered. Said music was the only language the heart understood, even when words stopped working. Emma leaned closer, breath soft on Elise's hand. She reached out and touched the pendant with one mittened finger. "Is that from your mom?" she asked. "Yes," Elise replied, voice trembling. "It's the only thing I couldn't sell." Without speaking, Emma rested her head gently against Elise's shoulder. Her small arm circled Elise's wrist, holding on with quiet certainty. No big speech, no grown-up advice, just presence. Daniel watched as something in Elise's posture eased, as if a weight had shifted from one person to three. After a moment, he crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite them. He stared at the fire for a few seconds before his own story slipped into the space between them. "I lost my wife 2 years ago," he said, his voice steady but low. "Car accident. She was on her way home from picking up cupcakes for Emma's birthday." Elise lifted her eyes, her expression softening. "One minute we were texting about what to eat for dinner," he continued. "The next, I was trying to explain to a 5-year-old why Mommy wasn't coming home." He glanced at Emma. She didn't talk much after that. No songs, no questions, just silence. He exhaled slowly. "You asked how I got through it?" He shook his head slightly. "I didn't. I just learned how to carry it. Some days heavier than others." Then he looked at his daughter. Emma started humming again before I did. Little tunes, then songs. She found her way back to joy somehow, and when she did, she tugged me along with her. The room settled into a stillness that wasn't empty. 3 people, 3 stories of loss, sharing the same small circle of firelight. No pity, no fixing, just the quiet recognition that pain can sit at the same table as hope for a little while. And if you're listening tonight with your own losses curled up beside you, maybe you can sit at that table too, just for a moment. You don't have to say anything, just breathe with them. The carols in the sanctuary slowly faded as the service ended, replaced by softer sounds, chairs scraping gently, low conversations, the rustle of coats and scarves. In the adjoining hall, volunteers moved quietly, setting out more cocoa, thick slices of cinnamon bread, and bowls of soup that sent up little clouds of steam into the warm air. Elise hovered near the doorway, instinctively positioning herself where she could slip out if anyone seemed to notice her too much. Her fingers curled around Daniel's scarf at her throat as if afraid it might vanish if she loosened her grip. Years of hardship had trained her to fade, to become part of the background, to leave before anyone could decide she didn't belong. A small tug at her coat sleeve pulled her back from the urge to disappear. Emma stood there, eyes bright. "There's cocoa and cinnamon bread," she announced, as if bringing news of some grand feast. "And you'll sit with us, right?" Elise opened her mouth to answer, then hesitated. Old reflexes rose up. "Say no, take the drink, thank them, leave before you get attached." But Emma's little hand had already slipped into hers again, warm and certain. The decision was made before Elise could talk herself out of it. They moved through the room together. People chatted in clusters, coats draped over chairbacks, laughter mingling with the clink of ceramic mugs. Daniel waited at a table near the fireplace, 2 cups of cocoa already set down, a plate of cinnamon bread between them. His coat hung neatly over the back of his chair. When Elise reached out to pull her seat closer, Daniel noticed the raw redness of her knuckles, the way her fingers trembled. Without comment, he slipped off his leather gloves and held them out. "These are warmer than they look," he said lightly. "I'll survive. My pockets do most of the work anyway." She stared at the gloves, then at him, suspicious of kindness that seemed to ask for nothing in return. When he didn't push, only offered a quiet smile, she finally accepted. The lining was soft and already warm from his hands. As she pulled them on, it felt like remembering what safety used to be. A moment later, he set a plate in front of her. Thick cinnamon toast, still warm, butter melting into its surface, and cocoa crowned with tiny marshmallows just beginning to dissolve. For a second, she simply stared. "If we're sharing warmth," he said with a gentle shrug, "might as well share calories, too." A small laugh escaped her, half surprised, half reluctant, but undeniably real. It startled her the way that first laugh after a long sorrow always does, a little like hearing someone else's voice come out of your own mouth. They ate in a quiet that wasn't awkward. Emma hummed softly between bites, dipping the crust of her bread into her cocoa. Elise took careful sips, feeling the heat travel through her chest, melting some invisible frost around her heart. "I've been staying out back," she said at last, eyes on her cup. "Behind the east steps. 3rd night now. The stone blocks some of the wind." She tried to sound casual, as if describing a slightly inconvenient hotel. Emma's humming stopped. She set her bread down on the paper napkin. "Daddy," she said gently, turning toward him, eyes serious in a way that made her look much older. "Can she come with us? Just for tonight. She's cold." Daniel blinked. For a moment, the room felt too small for the decision pressing in on him. "Em," he began carefully, "it's not that simple." Elise moved to rescue him from the bind, used to closing doors on herself before anyone else had to. "It's okay," she said quickly. "You've already given me more than I expected. I'll be fine." Emma's little hand reached for hers again, holding on like someone refusing to let a balloon float away. "But it's Christmas," she whispered. "Mommy always said we help people when we can. She'd want us to." The words hung in the air between them. Mommy would want us to, and something in Daniel's face shifted, like a door he'd kept tightly shut had just felt a small, insistent knock. If you've ever stood at the edge of a choice that could change everything, you know that quiet, heavy pause where the heart decides before the mind catches up. Daniel sat back slowly, Emma's words echoing louder than the chatter around them. Mommy would want us to. It had been a long time since he'd let himself think in those terms. What his wife would have done, how she would have opened their door without a second thought. Grief sometimes makes people hard. In his case, it had made him cautious, careful, always counting risks. But now, looking at Elise with Daniel's scarf around her shoulders and his gloves swallowing her hands, he saw more than a stranger. He saw the hollowed look of someone who had run out of safe places. He had seen that same look in the mirror once, on nights when the house echoed too loudly. He stood up, reached for his coat and keys, and spoke in that calm way he used when making decisions at work, except this one mattered more than any meeting. "It's a 20-minute drive," he said. "We have a guest room, heat, a real bed." His eyes met Elise's, steady but gentle. "Just for tonight. No pressure. Come be warm." Elise's first instinct was to refuse. It rose up so quickly she nearly choked on it. Don't impose. Don't trust too easily. Don't get used to softness you can't keep. But then she felt Emma's fingers curl more tightly around her hand, as if the child were offering not just a place to stay, but an invitation to breathe. She glanced down at the gloves, at the cocoa now sweetly coating her tongue, then back to Daniel. Her nod came slowly, as if she had to move it through molasses, but it came. "Okay," she whispered, "just for tonight." Outside, the snow was still coming down, softer now, swirling under the streetlights. Daniel's SUV waited at the edge of the parking lot, its headlights casting pale beams through the mist. Elise climbed into the back seat, clutching her worn suitcase to her chest like a shield. Emma slid in beside her, buckling in with practiced ease, then leaned lightly against Elise's arm as if this were the most normal thing in the world. As the car pulled away from the church, Elise watched the building shrink in the rear window, the stained glass glowing like distant stars. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't walking away from something. She was being carried toward something unknown. The neighborhood they drove into wasn't grand or showy. No gated entrances or towering stone columns. Just a quiet street lined with modest, well-kept homes, each with its own patch of snow-covered lawn and a scattering of lights. When Daniel turned into the driveway, Elise saw his house clearly. A 2-story place with clean lines and dark-framed windows, warm light spilling from the living room. A small pine tree in the front yard was decorated with silver bells and pink ribbons that swayed gently in the breeze. Emma pressed her nose to the window. "We put them up last weekend," she said proudly. "Daddy let me pick the ribbons." Elise felt something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Wonder. Not envy, not bitterness. Just a quiet, aching amazement that such warmth could still exist in the same world where stone steps doubled as a bed. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and something savory from an earlier meal. Wooden floors were softened with woven rugs. A simple Christmas tree stood in the corner, hung with white lights and homemade ornaments, the kind children make with glue and too much glitter. On a side table was a framed photo of a woman laughing, hair caught in a summer breeze, Emma a toddler in her arms. Daniel's wife, Elise, knew without needing to ask. "This is our living room," Emma said, sweeping her arm as if introducing a guest of honor. "That's Mommy's chair, and that," she pointed to a well-loved teddy bear on the couch, "is Mr. Barrington. He's good at listening." Daniel cleared his throat softly. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said to Elise. "There's a towel and some things you can change into. Take your time." In the guest bathroom, warm steam from a running heater fogged the mirror. On the counter, someone had neatly folded a soft robe and a set of pajamas. Simple, comfortable, clearly chosen with care. Beside them lay a small note in tidy handwriting. "They were mine, but I'd like someone who needs comfort to have them." No name, no explanation, just that. Elise touched the fabric, then the note, her eyes stinging. For the second time that night, she found she couldn't quite breathe. Not because of the cold this time, but because of the unfamiliar weight of being welcomed. And somewhere deep inside, where she'd quietly convinced herself that kindness was for other people now, something shifted. Just a little. When Elise stepped back into the hallway wearing the borrowed pajamas and robe, she hardly recognized herself at first. Her hair was damp and combed back, her skin no longer tight with cold. The robe's fabric hugged her like something that remembered warmth even when she didn't. For a moment, she just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe, listening. From the kitchen came the soft clink of dishes, the murmur of running water, and the light, off-key humming of a little girl who didn't yet care whether every note was perfect. Elise followed the sound. Daniel was at the stove, stirring pasta in a pot, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up. A pan of garlic bread cooled on the counter beside a simple bowl of salad. It wasn't fancy, just noodles, butter, herbs, but everything about the scene felt intentional. Emma sat at the table arranging silverware with intense concentration, tongue poking out slightly as she tried to remember which side the fork went on. "This one's yours," Emma said when she saw Elise, pointing eagerly to a chair beside her. Right next to me. Elise moved slowly, afraid of waking from whatever this was. She sank into the chair, fingers curling around the edge of the table as if testing its solidity. Daniel set a plate in front of her. Pasta, salad, a slice of garlic bread, and then his own before sitting across from them. They didn't talk much at first. The sound of forks against plates, the quiet hum of the heater, and Emma's occasional giggles when a noodle slipped off her fork filled the space. It was an ordinary family dinner, the kind that happens in 1,000 houses every evening. For Elise, it felt like stepping into a memory she had never actually lived. "I used to teach music," she said after a while, surprising herself. "Elementary school, nothing glamorous, but I loved it." Emma's head snapped up. "You teach songs?" she asked, eyes going wide. "I did," Elise said softly. "I stopped when my mom got sick. I thought it would be temporary, but when she died, everything else fell apart. No savings, no backup plan. I sold my piano, then my car, then my place." She spoke without drama, just simple facts laid out like notes on a page. Daniel didn't interrupt. He listened the way you hope someone will listen when you're too tired to dress your story up. If you're up too late tonight replaying your own losses, you might know that feeling, the strange relief of saying the truth out loud and not having the world end because of it. After dinner, Emma bounced up from her chair. "Daddy, can she see the piano?" she asked. "Please, Mommy's piano." In the corner of the living room, against a soft gray wall, stood a black, upright piano. A string of white lights draped across its top like a halo. Elise stared at it, her breath catching. Her fingers twitched at her sides, remembering. "Go ahead," Daniel said quietly. "If you'd like." Emma took her hand and led her to the bench as if guiding someone back to a familiar shore. Elise sat down, hands hovering above the keys, not quite touching. It had been so long, longer than she wanted to admit. She pressed one key, then another. The sound was slightly out of tune, warm and human. Slowly, as if coaxing the music from some deep sleep, she began to play Silent Night. The notes floated through the room, gentle and clear, wrapping around the three of them like a soft blanket. Daniel stood just behind her, one hand resting lightly on the back of a nearby chair, watching as the stiffness left her shoulders, replaced by something quieter, more hopeful. When the last note faded, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt full, like an embrace. For the first time in a long time, Elise felt not just sheltered, but seen. Later that night, when the dishes were washed and Emma's yawns had turned frequent and dramatic, Elise gathered her worn coat and suitcase from the corner of the living room. The lamplight cast a soft circle around the couch where she stood, fingers fidgeting with the fraying handle. "I can sleep here," she said, nodding toward the sofa. "It's more than enough. I don't want to be in the way." Daniel, who had just finished tucking a blanket over a drowsy Emma on the other end of the couch, straightened slowly. He studied Elise for a moment, the way you might look at someone standing in a doorway with one foot already outside. "There's a guest room upstairs," he said quietly. "Warm, quiet, a door you can close. It's yours tonight if you want it." She shook her head out of habit more than conviction. "I can't stay. I'll disrupt your life." His voice softened, but he didn't look away. "You didn't disrupt anything tonight. For the first time in a long time, this house doesn't feel hollow." He let that truth sit there without wrapping it in anything more comfortable. "If you're willing, there's more than just one night. I could use help with school pickups, homework, the kind of things I'm still learning to juggle. Emma loves music. Maybe you could teach her. I can pay you. And that room upstairs," he nodded toward the hallway, "could be yours for a while." Elise felt the words land like a blanket laid over chilled shoulders. Heavy, unfamiliar, almost too kind to trust. "Why me?" she asked, voice barely above a breath. "You don't even know me. I have nothing." Daniel's answer was simple. "Because my daughter hugged you first," he said. "She's careful with her heart. She doesn't offer it to just anyone. She's never been wrong about people." On the couch, Emma, not quite asleep after all, peeked from under the edge of the blanket with a sleepy smile. "I like you," she mumbled. "You make the house sound like a song." The room went quiet. The ticking of a nearby clock, the faint hum of the heater, and the slow, steady breathing of a child who trusted this moment completely seemed to hold everything together. Elise swallowed, feeling the tightness in her throat shift into something else. something like hope's first fragile step. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay, for a while." Upstairs, the guest room smelled faintly of lavender and clean sheets. It wasn't large, but the bed was neatly made, a soft lamp glowing on the nightstand. Elise set her small photograph of her and her mother next to the lamp, propping it against the wall. She didn't own much else, but for the first time in longer than she could measure, the space around her didn't feel borrowed. It felt like a place where a new chapter could begin, even if she wasn't ready to say that out loud yet. Downstairs, Daniel turned off the lights one by one. The house settled into its nighttime sounds, pipes, wind, the faint creak of wood. But underneath it all was something new, almost imperceptible. The quiet rhythm of three hearts learning how to share the same roof. The weeks that followed did not change everything at once. Life rarely works that way. Instead, it shifted slowly, almost shyly, like the light that creeps into a room just before sunrise. Elise woke each morning in that small upstairs room and needed a moment to remember where she was. Why the mattress was soft instead of stone. Why the air smelled faintly of lavender instead of exhaust and cold. Her hair, now washed and dried, fell more easily into a simple braid. It was a small thing, but it changed how she carried herself. Her eyes, once clouded and distant, began to hold a little more focus, as if her mind was finally catching up to the fact that her body was no longer in constant flight. Every afternoon, she walked to Emma's school, the winter air biting at her cheeks in a way that felt almost invigorating instead of cruel. The first time Emma spotted her waiting by the gate, the child's face lit up like a lantern. She ran full speed, backpack bouncing, boots crunching in rhythm. "You came," she cried, as if there had been any real doubt. They walked home together, talking about spelling tests gone wrong, cafeteria mysteries, and which classmate had the best snowman at recess. At home, they sat at the piano, Elise guiding Emma's small fingers over the keys, turning scales into little rhymes, mistakes into opportunities for giggles. Some songs were too loud, some too soft, but none of that mattered. The house was no longer silent. One afternoon, they tried baking sugar cookies. Flour dusted the counters, the floor, and most of Emma's nose. Elise flicked a bit of powdered sugar at her, and Emma shrieked with delighted outrage. When Daniel came in from a call, loosening his tie, he found them in the middle of the kitchen. Emma brandishing a crooked cookie like a trophy, Elise laughing with her face streaked in white. In the evenings, they ate dinner together at the same worn wooden table. Some nights it was pasta. Other nights grilled cheese or simple soup and bread. Nothing fancy, just food shared in the same light. Emma talked more. Daniel listened more. Elise began to tell gentle stories from her teaching days. Children who sang off-key with all their hearts. Shy students who found their courage in a single note. Daniel showed his care in quiet details. One morning, Elise discovered a pair of soft, fur-lined slippers outside her bedroom door with no note, just waiting. Another night, she flicked her bedside lamp and, for the first time since she'd arrived, it didn't sputter. He'd fixed it while she was out. On the kitchen counter, next to the mugs, she found a box of chamomile tea with a small sticky note. For the heavy nights. She stared at it for a long time before brewing a cup. The warmth traveled slowly through her, like someone knocking gently on a locked door. They did not call themselves a family, not yet, but they moved through the house like people learning a quiet, shared song. One note at a time, one kindness at a time, until the melody began to feel familiar to all three of them. And if you're lying awake tonight feeling alone, you might take comfort in knowing that sometimes, without fanfare or announcements, life starts to knit itself back together in exactly this kind of gentle, ordinary way. By the time Christmas rolled around again, the snow on Maple Avenue had become a familiar guest, rather than an unwelcome intruder. The neighborhood had gathered for its annual Christmas Eve performance, a tradition of folding chairs, thermoses of cocoa, and parents pretending not to cry when their children sang slightly off-key. On a small wooden platform set up between two lampposts, Emma stood in her pink coat and sparkly scarf, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Her mittened hands gripped the microphone a little too tightly. Behind her, a cardboard backdrop painted with stars and snowflakes fluttered in the light wind. Elise knelt beside her just before the music started. "You know what to do," she murmured, tucking a stray strand of hair under Emma's hat. "Don't worry about perfect, just sing from your heart. That's where the real music lives. Emma nodded, swallowing hard, then turned to face the small crowd, neighbors, teachers, Daniel with his hands shoved in his coat pockets, watching as if this were the most important concert in the world. The backing track began, a simple piano line. Emma took a breath and started Away in a Manger. Her voice was small, a little shaky at first, but clear. People stopped rustling programs and sipping cocoa. They listened. It wasn't about hitting every note. It was the way her voice carried a softness that had learned how to be brave again. Halfway through, someone in the crowd smiled and began clapping gently along. Others followed, not loud, just enough to tell her, "We're with you." When the song ended, the street filled with applause. Emma's whole face lit up. She looked straight at Elise before hopping down and running into her arms. "We did it!" she laughed, wrapping herself around Elise's waist. "We really did it." Elise caught her, spinning just a little, her own laughter slipping out unguarded. The sound washed over Daniel like a quiet wave. He stood a few feet away, watching them with an expression that had gone deeper than pride. Something closer to awe, and to the realization of just how far they had all come from that cold church step. Later that night, after the music faded and the neighbors drifted back to their homes, Elise and Daniel stood together in the front yard. The house glowed softly behind them. Snow fell in slow, gentle flakes, settling on their shoulders. They didn't speak at first. Elise hugged her arms around herself, watching her breath cloud the air. Daniel stood beside her, close enough for their sleeves to brush. "I'm scared," he said finally, the words quiet but very clear in the winter air. She turned her head, eyes searching his face. "Of what?" "Of caring about someone again," he answered. "Of opening all the doors we closed to survive. It feels dangerous." Elise let out a slow breath. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "I haven't felt this safe in years. I don't quite know how to trust it." The silence between them pulsed like a heartbeat. Then Daniel took one small step closer, his voice almost a whisper. "But losing you..." He paused, the honesty raw in his throat. "That scares me more than learning how to love again." Her lips parted, but no words came. He reached up and brushed a single snowflake from her hair, the gentleness of the gesture making her eyes sting. Under the falling snow, he leaned in, giving her just enough time to turn away if she wanted to. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was careful and full at the same time. Not a claim, not a demand, just a question answered softly with yes. When they parted, Elise's eyes were shining. Daniel didn't rush to fill the moment with explanations. Some feelings don't need narration. From the living room window, a small face suddenly appeared, cheeks pressed against the frosted glass. "Daddy kissed Elise!" Emma shouted, grinning so wide it must have hurt. "I knew it! My hug is magic!" They both turned, startled, then burst into laughter, snow swirling around them like confetti. And if you're lying awake tonight wondering if new beginnings still exist for you, maybe you can tuck this image beside your pillow. Two people in the snow, a child at the window, and the quiet, late-blooming courage it takes to admit you're ready to be warm again. 6 months later, the house on Maple Avenue no longer felt like a temporary shelter or a place Elise might slip away from in the night. It had quietly become home. Not because of new furniture or fresh paint, though a few more framed photos now lined the hallway, but because of the small routines that stitched the days together. Shared breakfasts with toast crumbs and orange juice rings on the table, afternoons of school pickups, piano practice, and Emma's endless questions. Evenings, where the lights stayed on just a little longer because no one was in a rush to leave the warmth of the kitchen. Elise now worked part-time as a music aide at Emma's school. If you'd walked past the open windows on certain afternoons, you might have heard her voice leading a chorus of children through silly songs about seasons and frogs, turning clumsy harmonies into easy laughter. She walked home with Emma almost every day, their hands linked, their conversations stitched with playground stories and half-hummed melodies. She hadn't slept with the guest room for a while now. At Daniel's gentle suggestion, she'd moved to the room just across the hall from Emma's, closer for nighttime bad dreams and early morning whispers. A second toothbrush in the bathroom, a sweater hanging over a chair, a pair of slippers left at the foot of the bed. Small, ordinary things that signaled something extraordinary. She wasn't passing through anymore. She belonged. Dinner became their anchor. No phones at the table. Daniel kept that promise. Emma chattered about school projects and which friend had the best backpack. Elise shared stories about shy kids who sang just a little louder that day. Daniel listened, offered dry jokes at just the right moments, and washed dishes more often than he pretended to mind. They didn't call it anything grand. They just called it Tuesday or Thursday or leftover night. But if you looked closely, you'd see it for what it was. A family learning its own rhythm. One evening, just as the sun slipped behind the skyline and the air turned that familiar winter sharp, Daniel drove them back to where it all began, the steps of Grace Street Community Church. The stained glass glowed honey and rose in the early evening light, just as it had that first snowy night. Elise paused at the bottom of the steps, her chest tight, her fingers brushing the treble clef pendant at her throat. "I haven't been back here," she murmured. "I know," Daniel said. He wasn't in a suit tonight. Just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, the way he looked when the day's weight had been gently set down. He turned to her, eyes steady. "Elise Harper," he began, his voice low but sure. "You came into my life when I didn't even realize I needed to be saved." Her smile trembled. Before she could answer, he sank down on one knee on the cold stone step. "Stay," he said simply. "Stay with us, not just for a while, for good." He held out a small ring, the gold glinting softly in the church light. "Marry me. Build the rest of our life with us." Elise's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she was back on this same step, shivering with nowhere to go. Then she saw Emma at the sidewalk, hands clasped, eyes wide and shining, and Daniel kneeling in front of her with all his vulnerability laid bare. "A little girl in a pink coat saved my life with one hug," Elise whispered, tears gathering. "And her father gave me a place to begin again." Her voice broke, but her answer was clear. "Yes, yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that was threaded with laughter and tears and all the days they had survived to reach this one. Emma sprinted up the steps, flinging her arms around both of them. "I told you," she declared, squeezing tight. "Hugs fix everything." Later, the three of them sat on the porch at home, Emma fast asleep with her head in Elise's lap. Stars blinked overhead like distant patient witnesses. Daniel looked at the sky, then at Elise. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Emma hadn't said anything that night?" he asked. "Every day," Elise said, brushing a curl from Emma's forehead. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you regret letting us in?" She met his gaze, her smile calm and full in a way it had never been on those church steps. "No," she whispered. "You didn't just give me a place to sleep. You gave me somewhere to start over." They sat in silence after that, fingers intertwined, the night wrapping around them like a soft blanket. In that quiet was everything they had lost, everything they had found, and everything still waiting ahead. And if you're out there tonight listening in the dark, maybe on a couch that doesn't feel like yours, or in a room that feels too empty, hear this. Kindness can find you in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it's a cup of cocoa. Sometimes it's a stranger's scarf. And sometimes it's a little girl who looks at your tired eyes and says, "I think you need a hug. Can I hug you?" If this story touched your heart, if it brought you a little comfort or a quiet tear in the middle of the night, remember there are more stories where healing, love, and second chances keep showing up. Thank you for staying with this one until the end.